I want something, I've got something, and what happens here? Short answer, suffering. Hi, I'm Daniel and this is Slowerr. Today, I want to start with a question. How do you know when you're suffering? And before you come up with an answer, I want you to analyze the type of experiences that are coming to mind. Most likely, there will be experiences of feeling sad or hurtful experiences or so-called bad experiences. And I point this out because I believe we are so conditioned to think of suffering as something that we must avoid that we lose perspective if we want to overcome such difficulties. We need to embrace suffering. And I use suffering here as a more broad concept, not just as when something gives us pain, but something that can also give us joy, this sense of marvel. I think about Greek tragedies. In Greek tragedies, characters were always kings or queens, can't escape their fate, which is both a beautiful and a tragic thing. And whether you believe that there's a fate that we cannot escape or that we somehow make our own destiny, just to put like two different opposing approaches to the same thing, which is what do we do of ourselves throughout our lifetime. I want you to think about the process in between. I want something, I've got something, and what happens here? Short answer, suffering. Suffering as experiencing. Experiencing as being open. And I believe that open to whatever comes. Of course, this is like the first step because whatever comes can imply a whole array of things which are more or less desirable. But my point right now is that if I only focus on the pain and I want to protect myself from the pain, which of course makes sense, but if that's my only approach to experience, then what happens to this whole potential for marvel, for joy, for connection? Yes, it vanishes. So I hope you by now are kind of foreshadowing the irony I'm trying to address, which is that if I want to avoid pain by disengaging from experience, life experience, then what I'm most likely to get is more pain. So think about that when you are coming up with your own answer to the question I shared with you, which is, how do you know when you're suffering? So if you're still with me, we can ask, how do you know you are living? I came across a poem by W.S. Merwin, which is called BERRYMAN, and is about the poet John Berryman. As I learned, because this is the first time I've heard about these two poets, W.S. Merwin was a student of John Berryman by W.S. Merwin. I will tell you what he told me in the years just after the war, as we then called the Second World War. Don't lose your arrogance, yet he said. You can do that when you're older. Lose it too soon and you may merely replace it with vanity. Just one time he suggested changing the usual order of the same words in a line of verse. Why point out a thing twice? He suggested I pray to the muse, get down on my knees and pray right there in the corner, and he said he meant it literally. It was in the days before the beard and the drink, but he was deep in tides of his own through which he sailed chin sideways and head tilted like a tacking sloop. He was far older than the dates allowed for, much older than I was when he was in his 30s. He snapped down his nose with an accent I think he had affected in England. As for publishing, he advised me to paper my wall with rejection slips. His lips and the bones of his long fingers trembled with the vehemence of his views about poetry. He said the great presence that permitted everything and transmuted it in poetry was passion. Passion was genius, and he praised movement and invention. I had hardly begun to read. I asked, how can you ever be sure to what you write is really any good at all? And he said, you can't. You can't. You can never be sure. You die without knowing whether anything you wrote was any good. If you have to be sure, don't write. So, regarding what I'm here sharing with you, which is these thoughts on suffering and experience, I want you to think about this last part of the poem. If you want to be sure, don't write. Okay, so let's assume you guys are not writers. Then change the verb. And instead of writing, say painting, say building, say designing, whatever. My point is, say being involved in a relationship. Lately, I've felt that we as a society are so caught up in our need for optimization and urge to upgrade whatever it is to upgrade, that we are reluctant to be present. We try to always be ahead. And somehow we've come to embrace the fallacy of being ahead as better to being present. And you might argue this notion of being in the moment like in a very literal way, and we can discuss that and how different philosophies or system of beliefs approach this being in the moment. But now I don't want to get too deep, but more practical. I'm a teacher and I coach people, and I get to witness how people are so focused on the outcomes that they completely lose perspective of their present. And of course, they get frustrated very, very quickly. And what happens, of course, surprise to no one, they don't achieve what they're after. So if you want to be sure, don't write. I think it's a beautiful way of reminding us that life doesn't follow our orders. Life doesn't move at the pace of our expectations. How do we adjust? How do we become aware of the complexities of its nuances, of its movement? I think that's the important part of it. Not controlling every bit of our life, allegedly controlling, in order to guarantee an outcome that was established before actually knowing what we're doing. I don't know if you guys understand this last part I'm saying, and I hope I'm being clear. Perhaps I'm not being as clear. Remember, Slowerr is a place to kind of think out loud, so maybe this is a bit messy. If you like this format, let me know. Or if you think there are ways so I can improve it in order for you to, get something out of this conversation, also let me know in the comments. But if we just get obsessed with the outcomes, then it'll be harder for us to engage with the task at hand, to engage in this activity, in this relationship, in this pursuit. And I want us to remind ourselves that here in the present is where we get to do things. And that the joy that you can get from actually doing something, it's a great incentive to keep doing it. And that sometimes outcomes are only acknowledged in retrospect. And I think that the most beautiful and tragic things in life are those in which you just went for it and you embraced the risk of it, which was somehow worth it. Maybe you can explain it, maybe you can't, but that's what we're after, right? The experience. Well, I don't know, but this poem got me thinking. I read it and I had been reading it for the last couple of days, and every time I reread it, I like it more. So now, regarding the question at hand, how do you know when you're suffering? I want to share with you this basic framework that I have in order to kind of address this thing. And my way of approaching suffering has 3 stages. The first stage is shock. I chose an onomatopoeia to speak about it because I believe it's a more accurate way of addressing how do we get to a new experience. And usually it's not because we planned it, right? So something is shocking and it destabilizes us, and we have to react while not knowing how to react. And again, this can go like as a bad experience or as a good, joyful experience. After the shock comes the second stage, which I call experience. And experience, as in this way of understanding these things, implies a retrospective. Like it already happened. Like watching a film. Things have already been sorted out. And I'm just like kind of witnessing how the day developed. In our own lives, since there are no movies about our own lives, we kind of go back in our mind to these experiences and try to explain, at least to ourselves, why did we do what we did. A key difference between this shock and experience states is that I am aware that the event has already ended, and that whatever it is I'm trying to figure out is towards the future, not to change what happened, because I cannot do that. No one can. The third and last stage is forgetfulness. And forgetfulness is a skill. A skill we have to develop. What usually happens as we grow older is that we become more skeptical about life surprising us. We become more wary of new things, of new mysterious things. And we've experienced being hurt, being deceived, humiliated, whatever. So we shut ourselves down. So the point of forgetfulness as a skill is not to pretend to be naive. It's how do we build the discipline to let ourselves experience something relatively new again. After all that, to some, this might be not the smartest thing to do, right? Because you might say, why do I want to be hurt again if I've already been hurt enough? My answer to that is, what do you mean by enough? And my second question to that would be, according to whom? Because, again, I believe that as long as we're here, living, we have a chance to do something about ourselves, about or for the people that we care about our situation. So forgetfulness, I believe, it's a great filter to kind of muster this experience in a more like organic way, not as a weapon, but more as nourishing our present self. So I have this shock experience and forgetfulness, which for me at least have been very, very useful in addressing painful and joyful experiences in order to learn something new about myself, in order to try to be a better partner in my relationships, a better friend, a better son, a better teacher. And in order to remain light and open